I want to talk about the Savannah Guthrie latest statement. There's a lot actually to go through today. That statement, plus there's a couple of other pieces. As I mentioned, something's just breaking about the DNA. What jumped out at me was, I don't know if she intended to or not, but she made a little news about the actual crime, where she said, "It's day 24 since our mom was taken in the dark of night from her bed."
Yep.
No one has ever said that before. In fact, the sheriff said it early on and then took it back and said, "I didn't mean to say that. I'm not confirming whether she was taken from her bed." But there it is, straight from Savannah Guthrie herself. That's news. I mean, there was speculation, even we speculated just last week on this program, about whether this intruder was possibly knocking on the door before he was like messing with that Nest cam, because it almost looked like a knock. Other people have speculated he rang the doorbell to get Nancy Guthrie to come downstairs, because there didn't appear to be forced entry, at least at the front. Ashley Banfield reported early on in this case that her source told her there was forced entry. We don't know which door. She also reported that the back door to the house was left wide open. So presumably it was the back door. But in any event, in her bed is, or from her bed, taken in the dark of night from her bed is new. What, if anything, does it tell us?
Yeah, good for you. That's why you're an investigative journalist, because that's immediately what I picked up on, that, okay, wait a minute, is she just saying that as if to say, sometimes in kidnappings, like a John Benet Ramsey taken, from her bed type of deal. And it's almost like, something you would say, but I'm with you. I think she was literally that Savannah knows something that we didn't know, and now we do know, that she was taken from her bed. Well, that rules out, that Miss Guthrie, answered a door. There was a knock on the door. She went out, answered the door, and then the guy took her. That rules that out. If there was forced entry or there had to have been some type of entry, either forced or she left the door unlocked, God forbid, and they rousted her from her bed. Now that's a totally different thing. And so, yeah, that's significant.
It also seems to me, Will, to suggest that Savannah believes her mom did, in fact, return home to her house after having dinner with Tommaso and Annie, Savannah's sister and brother-in-law, earlier in the evening. We've all speculated about whether, what's the proof that Tommaso actually dropped her off at 9:48 with the garage door opening and then closing again at 9:50? Why do we believe that? Now, we believe the pacemaker continued to work until 2:28 that morning, at least. But what's our evidence that Nancy Guthrie was actually in that home? And our only evidence was really that the police said she was, and they seemed to believe it. And you tell me, Savannah saying her mom was taken from her bed seems to tell us that Savannah believes that too, which means that's what law enforcement told her.
Yeah, I think that's the only place that she could have drawn that information or gleaned that information from. And that's not uncommon, certainly, where family members will be told a little bit of detail, asked to keep it to themselves more often than not. But the care management of families in these kinds of situations, whether it be abductions, whether it be kidnappings or otherwise, when someone's gone missing, will be to try and keep them having a little bit of hope wherever possible. But I think, I was speaking with my other panel members, with Eric and James, in the break. And I think we're all in the agreement that this most certainly was an abduction. As to when it exactly happened, again, we're relying on certain information provided by family members. Again, how precise they are on their timings, again, is potentially questionable and is very difficult to evidence unless, again, this is captured on the Nest camera and there is evidence of when Nancy actually walked in, whether she went in via the garage, as it's believed to be the case. But I think in terms of this abduction, it is an abduction. If it was a kidnap, again, my fellow panel members, we all agree, ultimately they're looking for some sort of ransom. But because of the amount of publicity this has garnished, and I certainly know of many, many cases where someone has been kidnapped by unsophisticated criminals, that as soon as it gets some attention, as soon as they believe they're on the radar, it's not a closed affair with family members or whoever they may be demanding the ransom from, then they can panic because of their fear of apprehension and dispose of the hostage. So I think, regrettably, this was an abduction. If it wasn't for kidnapping, what was the motivation? What was the reasoning behind that?
Eric, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to agree, and we did talk about this earlier during the break. It certainly looks like an abduction. We don't know the reasons they were there. It could have been a shakedown. It could have been some other angry event, and then, of course, the abduction happens, and you have a trail of blood leading out of the house. It's interesting that we have the forced entry, that quite possibly the back door is wide open, and that she's in the bed. Now, one thing that I take from Savannah's newest video is that there's more despondency and less hope in the family. She certainly is starting to come around to the fact that 24 days into it, it's very unlikely that we will ever find Nancy Guthrie alive. I mean, that is heartbreaking. I think it is now worse for the family that they have no way of contacting the alleged kidnappers, and that's why we're saying it's an abduction, and that they don't know. And the scary thing here is, I think eventually that the FBI does catch this individual. I mean, it's just an odds game. With enough time and enough data and enough work, they tend to catch the perpetrator. But do we ever find Nancy? And it's not likely that we're going to find her alive at this point.
Right. It's been too many days. The other thing that jumped out at me about Savannah's statement was hope against hope. As my sister says, we are blowing on the embers of hope. She mentions the sister, James, which is interesting, given all the focus on the sister and more accurately, the sister's husband. To me, that's a way of endorsing the sister and reminding us they still believe in her and probably in Tomas too. I don't think you mentioned the sister unless you're looking to rehabilitate them both. So I think she communicated something with that too. Your thoughts?
I do, and I think we don't know. I don't know enough about their family. She doesn't mention her brother very much, but I would say that caught my eye, but my ear rather. What I really heard was the $1 million, and I know we talked about this, I think 2 weeks ago when I was with you, and the reward was 50 grand. And I was saying,
you said it needed to be higher.
Yeah, and now here we are.
You said 500,000,
right?
And they went up the next day to 100, and now they've gone up there next. And then they doubled your reward ultimately.
Money talks, and for me, it speaks to what I've felt the whole time, just the lack of urgency in this case. I mean, 24 days. It feels like we're working this like it's a robbery or a burglary. It just has never felt to me like a human life abduction story. And the cases I've been involved in, right? Like the case I've been involved in where someone is missing, there is a sense of urgency. And you're everything you got, you're throwing at it. And a $50,000 reward did not seem like urgency. And now here we are 24 days later and okay, $1 million. Well, hopefully somebody finally says something, but let's keep going because again, the woman is still out there, whether she's alive or not. We need to find this lady.
James, that is so true because one of the things that was so weird about this case from the get-go was within 24 hours of realizing Nancy was gone, they called off the search and rescue. The sheriff said, we've called it off. He said, I think permanently, but he said, but we'll restart it if we need to. The FBI got in and started to deploy resources that I don't know if it was looking for Nancy or looking for clues, but they were looking. But who ends the search and rescue after 24 hours?
Well, you said it. And then he said something else I read this weekend that, he said something like, we're not giving up. What are you talking about? How do you get that option? You don't get that option. You don't get I can just give up on finding a person.
Yeah.
That's just not an option.
Not on the table.
Right.
You're right. And so it's like, the sheriff, of course, is like, we're going to find her. We'll do whatever it takes. Could take days, could take years. What?
Right.
Like, again, who talks like that? But you're right. The lack of the sense of urgency has been right there in our face all along. And only now, Will, that Savannah sounds hopeless. Let's face it. I mean, she's talking about, the sister says, we're blowing on the embers of hope. She says she may already be gone. She may already have gone home to the Lord that she loves. She's dancing in heaven with her mom and dad and her beloved brother and with our dad. If this is what is to be, we'll accept it, but we need to know where she is. And then says at the bottom, we help us bring her home, our beloved mom, so we can either celebrate a glorious, miraculous homecoming, or she specifically puts this in here, celebrate the beautiful, brave, and courageous, noble life that she has lived. So she's being very explicit here that we recognize there's a very, very good chance that she's dead, and it's hoping against hope that she's not. But now here's $1 million. So what's that about?
I know, it's bizarre. And again, this is pure speculation, Megyn, but your point and what you were discussing with James just now about the 50,000, which initially came out, any open source research, just a simple Google of Savannah's salary would bring you into the context of 50,000 is a pittance. And it doesn't communicate any sense of urgency in terms of wanting to determine or establish where her mother is. The other thing is, again, this is speculation on my part, is that certainly the beginning of communications in the event of it turning into a kidnapping will be too lowball to a certain extent until a figure is actually presented, because it gives some sort of indication of what funds may be available or what funds could be readily accessible to resolve or to settle any kind of ransom. So this could have been as a result of poor advice that she was given to only cap it at about 50,000, because I think any child of a parent that's gone missing is going to offer unbelievable amounts of money to determine the whereabouts or the safe return of their parent if they've gone missing. So I think in this instance that...
Well, and there are reports now today that she was reportedly ready. Michael Ruiz of Fox reporting on X. Sources with knowledge of the family's thinking say the Guthries initially raised the idea of the reward, this bigger reward, on the first day of the investigation. They were advised by law enforcement to hold off as, quote, doing so earlier might overwhelm the infrastructure set up to field leads, tens of thousands of which have been coming in organically. They are now offering the 7-figure sum after coordinating with investigators. I mean, that makes sense to me. I'm sure Savannah's definitely got tens of millions of dollars in the bank. There's no way she would hesitate to say, here's $1 million to save my mom's life.
Yeah, this is poor advice, I think, initially, because you want to set a certain sense of urgency. But I think even this $1 million sort of reward is a mute offer, because ultimately whoever has been involved in the abduction of Nancy is highly unlikely to provide any kind of evidence unless it's someone associated or a family member or a friend who knows the individual or the individuals that are responsible for Nancy's abduction, who are going to furnish that information. And ultimately, it's a little too much too late.
All right, I'm just going to go cynical reporter for a second here, because I believe that story that Savannah was ready to offer the money from day one and was told by seasoned law enforcement. That's just going to bring every single crazy out of the woodwork who thinks they know anything, because $1 million is a fortune and everyone's going to want it. So she held it. But there is also, I'm just going to say, there's also the possibility that the reason somebody close to Savannah talked her out of offering $1 million early on is they thought somebody might come out of the woodwork and point the finger at them. You know, I mean, it doesn't, just because Savannah believes in the sister and the brother-in-law doesn't mean the rest of us have to say they had nothing to do with it. You know, the cops keep going there. They keep searching the place overnight. They towed her car. And so it's also possible, Eric, that Sister Annie or brother-in-law Tomas were quick to push law enforcement's thing, saying that's going to cause chaos. Hold that one back. And it would certainly help us understand why only now, when they're completely forlorn and they're desperate and feeling and seemingly out of leads, did they try to throw some money at the problem?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. You know, when I look at this, I wonder, was the sheriff initially thinking this is easily a kidnapping because he saw a ransom note come in to TMZ, which might be why he releases the crime scene way too early and then sets...
But he released it before the ransom note came in. He released it
and then sets
on Monday, and the first ransom note, I think, hit Tuesday evening or Wednesday.
And he sets the... then the family with law enforcement set the reward way too low, thinking that this is a kidnapping, we're going to work that chain of investigation, and now realizing that this is not a kidnapping, it's an abduction, because kidnappers actually want to make money. They don't send a note and then never respond to you and give you no avenue to negotiate with them. And here, finally, they're looking for those tips. I like the idea that was raised that, they got 40, 50,000 tips. And a lot of those tips were nonsense. They were things like, I've got a theory on the case, or, I don't like this person. Maybe it was them, right? And they have to sift through that. And that's a lot of infrastructure to do that. And then maybe it's fear that if we raise it too much, we're going to invite a lot more of that. But at this point, look, $1 million is a lot of money. Somebody knows that guy, and there's no honor among thieves. Maybe some person will say, hey, I can make a cool million and just give up my friend.
International disputes, inflation, rising national debt, digital currency. There's a never-ending list of reasons gold has risen over 700% in the last 20 years. And a never-ending list of reasons smart Americans diversify a portion of their savings into precious metals with Birch Gold Group. Gold can thrive during uncertainty, which is why it's a crucial part of a balanced financial strategy. It gives you peace of mind, given all the events that could impact the U.S. economy. See if holding gold in a tax-sheltered retirement account is right for you. Birch Gold can help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold. Just text MK to the number 989898 to receive your free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, just useful information. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, consider letting Birch Gold help you diversify with gold so you too can have peace of mind, regardless of the uncertainty. Text MK to the number 989898. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.